slogan-driven placard printed by a union or a left-wing group, whether it's that, or whether it's the chant, Ashab Nurid Iskat al-Nizam, the people demand the fall of regime, which moved like a rash across the world, or the less obvious things, like the acceptability of graffiti, both as art and protest, the covering of people's bodies in tattoos and piercings, the ubiquity of graphic novels, dance music, the white liquid Malox, which you put on your face to stop tear gas burning you, which is now turning up in all kinds of white-faced people are turning up, even in like fine art, in portraits, in art. It's the image of, in Greece certainly, in southern Europe, it's the image of the decade, to have your face sprayed with Malox. Believe me, you want it when you've been attacked with tear gas. Whether it's any of these things, it creates a kind of a zeitgeist, a spirit of the age. And what if we ask ourselves, what does it express cumulatively? I think the answer is scorn for the rich and their big watches and their yachts and their designer bodies. Scorn for the charade played out in the modern workplace of discipline, hierarchy, targets achieved, the cheap business suit, the insincere smile, the dead language of corporate communications. And, on top of scorn, solidarity with each other. Large parts of humanity are just basically signaling culturally across borders and across national cultures that their belief in a kinder, more human system, and that system is possible, and it will be born out of the ironic and the chaotic and the playful qualities of human life, not at all by pitting one cruel hierarchy against another. I'll finish by asking, where does it go? I think you can't, of course, deny the fact, that's Gurley Flynn, liberated woman of the Edwardian era. Okay, you can't deny the fact that on top of all this, the old world prevails. There are still unions, there are still communist parties, there are still Labour parties, there are still police, there are still armies, okay? There are still actually people coming out of university who are prepared to put on a funny suit, look geeky, avoid drugs, avoid any dodgy relationships, so that 20 years later they can become an MP and maybe even Prime Minister. So there are still people prepared to play the game of the old politics. So the classic revolutions in Libya, Egypt, probably those still to come, which I think will be Iran, I think it will be Russia, and I think it will be China. They will follow a modified form of the 1848 model or the 1917 model. You start with democracy, and then it moves to the question of social justice, of bread and butter, and the revolutionary forces split, and if they split really badly, one half attacks another and imposes a form of dictatorship on what is left of the revolution. That's 1848 to 51. That is most revolutions, to be honest. I think we are looking at that in Egypt. I think it's unfolding for us in Libya. Who knows what will happen in Syria. But here's the difference to 1848. By the mid-1850s, capitalism was delivering under the guise of autocratic regimes, Bismarck in Germany, Louis Napoleon in France, an upswing in economic life, which delivered better living conditions to the ordinary person. So the revolutions were put down, but it wasn't so bad. In fact, labour movements, of course, in the 1850s and 60s, flourished on the back of that rising tide of economics. I just don't think, unless and until they can change their attitude, the ruling political elites have a hope in hell of delivering that kind of 1850, 1860 style growth in the West. It's just hard to see the return of those conditions. In fact, what they are driven to, as I mentioned at the beginning, is the race to the bottom. The race to the bottom so fast that you meet the Chinese and Indian labour movement coming up. Sociologists, social workers will tell you, in the USA, there are already pockets of poverty in the USA that are as bad as the poverty you find across the border in Mexico. It's no longer the case that to live in a Western first world country guarantees you not to be in the bottom billion of the world. Now, the movements are clearly at a point where they have to cope with the failure to break through, the failure to go beyond gesture, the failure to go beyond, to be able to deal with the levels of repression. They are clearly, in other words, at a turning point. What do we see? We see two kinds of response to that. In this week in Spain is the most developed of the globalized horizontalist movements. So it's quite interesting that the former leadership of the people who sat down in the square have actually formed a party, Partido X, and on a quite moderate, quite liberal, almost to the right of the far left basis, and they've gone towards having demands. And the guy in the YouTube video for the party, I'm not sure whether he thinks it's a joke, actually is wearing a tie. In Greece, you've got Syriza, which I think will get its turn in power sometime in the next 18 months. So you've got organised, rather hierarchical left-wing forces, either emerging or coming from the old world to serve a purpose, and we don't know what that purpose is going to be in Syriza's case. In many ways, 2012 was a lesson for the horizontalist movement that politics abhors a vacuum, even one created with the best intentions of avoiding the dictatorial outcomes that the 20th century led to. And a great example of that, of course, is what's happened in America. You know, the Occupy movement kind of stamped and gnashed their teeth, and they said, we're not going to support Obama, and why should we support him? Why should we work for him again? Remember, a lot of the early first-time Obama activists became occupiers, so they were radicalized under Obama. But they said, never again, we're not going to do it again. But what happens? What happens? Obama beat Mitt Romney by 12 percentage points among all women voters. Why? Because if you are sitting, as I found in Toledo, Ohio, in an abortion clinic, trying to run it with crazy people kneeling down outside with their crucifixes, you know, and if the state has cut all its funding, and the laws are moving to make it almost impossible for you to treat these almost illiterate and downtrodden people who are coming through the door, because no middle-class woman goes to an abortion clinic like that. If you're sitting there, what are you going to do? Wait for the indignados to turn up with a solution, or vote Obama? They voted Obama. Women voted Obama 12 points ahead of Romney, bigger than any of, forget Latino, forget black, you know, or black voters obviously were mainly Obama, but it was an amazing swing. And it just tells you that politics doesn't wait for those who are sitting around waving their hands and doing the T sign and all this. It won't wait when things are impossible, and it's true in Greece as well. Because you might say live despite capitalism, but you can't live despite fascism. You can't actually live despite pogroms going on under your window. You've got to do something about them. You can't have a general assembly to decide what consensus is. You've just got to stop it. So I think it's a getting real moment, actually, for those movements. And who knows what they do. My final thought is this. Those of you, maybe some of you remember the 30s, but some of you will certainly have studied it and will have spoken to people who lived through the 30s. The actual fact about the 30s is that the first 4 years were not radical years. 29 to 33 were years of disorientation. The Comintern had its third period, which said, Social Democrats are fascists, never unite with them, it's our turn next. So the Communist parties were predictably then numbered in small thousands in each country, including this one. And policy was largely austerity. In America, here, the Labour government, the coalition, austerity imposed on people, and there was disorientation. What was it? And again, you know, you have to dig around a bit because the school history doesn't necessarily tell you this. What was it that turned it around? It was the victory of Hitler in Germany, and then the march in April 1934 in France, in Paris, of the French far right, which threatened to bring them to power as well. And at this point, the Comintern, the Trotskyists, the Labour, the Liberals just said, look, you know, this is no longer a game. We all have to change what we've been doing. And they were forced to do so by the actual masses of people. The 30s we know of the Popular Front, of the Spanish Civil War, of the occupation of the factories. Occupation of the factories in both France and America were imposed on unions that barely existed and certainly didn't want to occupy factories. They were imposed from below by people. And so what's the parallel? Of course, we're different people here, individualized, mercurial, different priorities, better tattoos, you know, different people. But Stefan Hessel, the person who invented the word indignado, 92-year-old veteran of the French resistance, says, look, and he wrote this book, Indignez-vous, okay? And he said, look, it was fascism, not poverty, that caused us to be radical. And it was that made us indignant. and I urge you to be indignant, he said to the young people. And he's now kind of God to the anti-capitalist movement, and very authoritative. I think that's the insight I would offer. It is in the countries where it's getting just so serious that you can't just wait around for these tactics to finally bear fruition, that I think we will see what comes next. I don't know what comes next, and my job is not to promote it, advocate it, or even necessarily explain why it fails. It is simply, as a journalist, to record it. And what I've tried to do tonight, in my is to explain the mental framework that I use to try and understand the world around us. And so far, it hasn't left me being surprised by anything.